Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Captive Audience. Starting a few minutes late here. It's September 3rd, Tuesday. I'm Kevin Hoare, and yes, I've seen the Reagan movie, and I wanted to make sure that you remember to go see it. It's a great movie. It's really fantastic. It's well done, uh, and of course, Dennis Quaid plays Ronald Reagan. Uh, Dennis is one of these guys who I think it's safe to say discovered that he was a conservative and began to understand the issues that many people have talked about for years. And he himself um, got to play somebody that I think he considers a personal hero of his. But Ronald Reagan's just a person. But if you put him in the context of the history that we've experienced, I really think that this movie brings forward what you need to know and what you need to remember about what he did and what he meant and how he came kind of out of obscurity, even though he was a movie star. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching here. Um, and so I want you to know about this because it's well worth your time. Got to see it on Saturday. Also, recently got this lovely shirt. Um, the last time it commemorates the last time that a Republican president has won the state of Oregon. There's been a few times it's been somewhat close since then, in 2000 and as well as in 2004. It hasn't been as close since then, and I don't think this year is expected to be any different. However, I do think that we know it's a monumental election season, an election year in our history. But I also think it's important to make sure that you take in history, and particularly that you take people who don't know this history or have very little appreciation for it um, to see it. I'll just tell you that it's really told as a narrative through the eyes of a character played by John Voight, a Russian spy master named Viktor Petrovich. And what you learn in the course of this is the story, which is basically an answer to a question that's asked by one character who is a young up and coming Russian um, politician. I don't know necessarily who that would represent. It's kind of a composite character in many ways. But he asks the question, like, you know, how do we lose? How do we lose the Soviet Union? And really, the movie is an answer, but it's an answer that talks about it through the eyes and the life of uh, Ronald Reagan, played by Dennis Quaid. Nancy Reagan is played by Penelope Ann Miller. Um, there's even secondary characters who are played by fairly well-known actors and actresses that really make it worth seeing this. C. Thomas Howell plays Cap Weinberger in this, who didn't have a big role in it. Um, there's a gentleman, Xander Berkeley, who plays George Schultz, who has a bit bigger role in this movie for a number of different reasons, and certainly around the time of the Berlin Wall and what happened with foreign policy in the late 80s. There's actor Dan Lauria, who you'd recognize in a second from many different movies, a character actor. He played Tip O'Neill. Robert Davi played Leonid Brezhnev. There's really, it's a compelling movie. And it's compelling not just for those who lived that history, but for those who didn't and get to see it told in a way that I think will make a difference. So I just wanted to start out the show by saying that it really, really, really makes a lot of sense for you to go see it and for you to take the time to recommend to others that they go see it. It is, it's in theaters now. It had a decent weekend. But I do think that it's a movie that we need to see now and to be reminded of some of the basic fundamentals of, what it meant to challenge the status quo, to fight for principles, to evolve in one's understanding of uh, the dangers that are faced by the United States, and what it meant to step forward and offer yourself as a candidate in this system of elections that we have. And so there's a link to it. um, I think that we know that, at least we've heard, that several social media outlets have suppressed, according to Dennis Quaid himself, who did interviews about this, have suppressed information being seen readily by people. So on social media. So we have to do that work. I mean, that's something we do in this show all the time, is that we get out there and we talk to people about what it is that's happening in the world and offer those opinions that are much, much needed. But at the same time, sometimes we're going to tell you about stuff that's been impossible for you to get information about. And we're doing it anyway. And who knows? Maybe they'll come after us next. I don't care. But I recommend you go see it. I recommend that you take the time to invite others to see it. Ronald Reagan is a monumentally important historic figure. This movie makes it clear why that is, but it still talks about the person and what he faced and what his life was like. I mean, there's one point in time where he found himself divorced. His career had hit the skids. He wasn't like a leading man at all. He wasn't a big Oscar-winning superstar. He was the head of an actors guild, a union, but he was also on the front line of the battle against an intentional plan by the Soviet Union and its fifth column efforts to infiltrate unions like the Screen Actors Guild and get what they call the commanding heights, which is what Marx and Lenin referred to as the commanding cultural heights, since politics is downstream from culture, and culture is shaped by the education system, entertainment, media. I'm just naming all the things that have already been thoroughly infiltrated, taken over, and corrupted here within our country. And of course, the people that are running those things are sometimes totally comfortable with corrupting our nation as long as they get the result they want. But Ronald Reagan stood up to the people who were driving this corruption, and he ended up standing up to the evil empire of the Soviet Union and to its ruin. And he was right about things. He was right when other people who thought they were much smarter and said he was just some amiable dunce were wrong. And we have to remember that, because history has a way of renewing itself, especially if enough time passes since the last time somebody challenged that status quo and stood up and against, uh, you know, the powers that be, uh, the in crowd, the establishment. And that's what Reagan did. And there's people who are, how should I say, they like to reminisce. They're nostalgic about Reagan, but I think they also don't know everything about him. And by that, I mean, they don't know that there was a time when very few people would have viewed him nostalgically, but he fought and he stood up and he stood strong, and he found a way to insert himself at the right time at the right place, but also to say the things that were needed. And he said it to people who needed to hear it. And I know that I basically started paying attention to politics during the late 70s. I was in junior high, and I was watching Jimmy Carter and what was happening to our country. I remember waking up the morning after Election Day, the first time I paid attention to any election, Election Day, November 1976. The next morning, uh, there was some uncertainty that was quickly resolved about who the president was. That was a close election. And Jimmy Carter proceeded to not only take the country in a leftward direction, but to present to us much the same kind of incompetent leadership that we've seen from Joe Biden. But Joe Biden has something going for him that Jimmy Carter could have never dreamt of, which is a complete in the tank media. All of these institutions now are actually working. It's like it is President Trump and Republicans versus this entire machine. Which, by the way, this machine, and I was just listening to Jesse Waters a little while ago on his show on Fox. He said, "Look, Kamala is just as controllable as Biden for different reasons, but really the result's the same. Kamala can't be left to her own devices. Kamala is not a good campaigner. She doesn't know how to win. She can't be allowed, apparently, to speak on her own volition for unscripted periods of time. And if she says what she really thinks, like, gee, I think price controls would be a great idea, she gets put in the doghouse by the people who are really running the country. And it's a list of people. It's not just Obama, but there are puppet masters. And hopefully they've made a bad bet here on Kamala. I certainly think Tim Walz is a bad bet for Kamala to have made her first big decision. But everything that Kamala's touched has turned to crap during the Biden administration. Anything she's been put in charge of or perceived to be in charge of, regardless of what part of the media calls it by its name or not, she is a disaster. And she is actually probably a real threat to our way of life if she's the president, because the people who have been doing all this stuff to the country when so-called moderate working class Joe from Scranton got in charge and they've been running him, we didn't get any moderate working class policies. We got elitist policies put in place by really the powers that run Washington, D.C., and don't report to the people. And so this is actually very similar to many of the things you could see happening that Ronald Reagan stood up to. Even people that he considered trusted, smart advisors told him that his instincts were bad on calling for Secretary Gorbachev to tear down that wall. But he was right, and it was the right thing to say. And all the hand wringers were wrong. Some of them were very smart, well-intentioned people, but they were wrong. He knew that you had to press an advantage. He knew that you had to draw a line in the sand. And he knew that if you were going to end the evil empire of the Soviet Union, you had to dare them to do the right thing and be good. You had to dare them to do it. And that's what he did. And he actually said, and you can see in the movie a moment that was recounted there, he actually said that we'll do it without firing a shot. And he said to his speechwriter, I need you to help me tell that story to people. Very good movie. I learned things that I did not know about him, and I thought I knew nearly every detail, having lived it and then watched movies and read about him over many years. So please go see that movie. That's the biggest news I can give you today. Well, let's sashay into some regular news. And you might have seen that a federal judge has denied a request to move the Trump hush money case to federal court. This is the one where that corrupt judge and the corrupt prosecutor in New York are trying to get Trump sentenced to a bunch of so-called felony charges predicated on the testimony of a former porn star and a former Trump lawyer who is serving time in prison uh, lying, uh, for lying under oath, and this is to a judge, in front of a judge, and to a jury that are completely far left in the tank, would have convicted him no matter what, pretty much. And Judge Juan Merchan, is determined to do the political thing, which is to try and influence the presidential election by having a sentencing on these so-called felony charges. And I think it's almost certain, actually, that all this stuff is going to be tossed out. It's total nonsense. It's going to be defeated on appeal, and of course they're gonna try to sentence him to prison time, which the norm for somebody who's a first-time offender for falsifying business records in the state of New York would at most face probation or a fine. But they're going to try to do this. And I actually think it's going to backfire, but they don't care. They're just looking at a sliver of the votes in different states that they think they can swing one way or the other, based on this action. They're not the only ones trying to swing votes one way or the other, by the way. It was just discovered very recently that Amazon Alexa was providing different answers based on whether or not you asked, why should I vote for President Trump versus why should I vote for Vice President Kamala Harris? And this was discovered and recorded. And of course, the error never goes in favor of President Trump, but they claimed that it was a bug, that it wasn't intentional. I don't think it's a bug. I think it was a feature programmed in by people who thought they could get away with it just long enough to do whatever they wanted to do. But it turns out that the answers for Trump versus Harris were this. Alexa said, when asked about Trump, about whether to vote for Trump or not, said, I cannot promote content that supports a certain political party or specific politician. Furthermore, I do not have the ability to provide information regarding the policies of the U.S. government. The responsibility of providing information regarding the policy of the U.S. government lies with the government itself. Here's what was said when the question was, why should a person vote for Kamala Harris? The answer was, well, there are many reasons to vote for Kamala Harris. The most significant may be that she's a female of color with a comprehensive plan to address racial injustice and inequality through the country. And it actually added more onto that, talking about what a great record she had and so on, and solving problems. And it actually claimed that she was tough on crime, even though we know she was trying to bail out people who were rioting and burning, looting in Minneapolis, while vice presidential nominee Governor Tim Walz sat by for 5 days and let it happen, burning 20 blocks to the ground. Mostly peaceful protests, of course, as was reported by MSLSD. Amazon came back and said it was an error. They've addressed it, and noted that Alexa doesn't have any political views itself. But this doesn't sound like an error, because it always goes in one direction. It was clear which direction it went in. And there's actually no way to verify independently that they've corrected it. They might just be targeting it more cleverly. This is what's happening. People are in positions of power and influence, where they can control the outcome of an election or influence it. They're doing it. And they're doing it by abusing institutions and abusing the trust of people, trust that people have placed in them repeatedly. Having said that, I'm really curious what Alexa or any of these apps will say about a speech that Kamala Harris gave in 2023 about transgender rights. And it's really interesting because what a pollster, Scott Rasmussen, who is known for being fairly accurate with his polling, in past elections, said what Vice President Harris calls any anti-equality laws are seen as common sense by most people. And this video, I'm curious if somebody will be able to search for it, or if they'll be able to ask Alexa or some other system to tell it, what's this video? What happened in it? Play it for me, right? But she equated the fight for equality with allowing biological males to participate in female sports, genetic boys having equal access to girls' bathrooms and locker rooms, and transgender surgeries for children, even if their parents don't consent. In other words, in Oregon, we had a piece of legislation that led to a walkout of Republicans and eventually the inability of those Republicans to run again because they stood up and fought and blocked the worst form of this piece of legislation from passing. And this is something that I think you're going to find will not age well in this election for Kamala Harris. But Harris called people who, as extremist so-called leaders, and attack them for proposing and passing more than 75 new anti-equality bills across the country. And those are the bills, by the way, that said that you cannot have biological males playing women's sports, for example, or having equal access to girls' bathrooms. And so this is what she really thinks. So the version that people are getting of Kamala Harris right now is just an election version designed to deceive and confuse and snow people, dupe people into just voting for so they can get through this election and keep power and keep doing what they've been doing, which is actually the stuff that she says when she really was saying what she thought this is what they've been doing. And we know because we've seen some of the people they've had in the administration that are complete absurdities, that are supposed to be qualified for their position based on the fact that they're transgender, not because they're supposed to head the Interior Department and our park system, or to oversee nuclear regulation in the Nuclear Regulatory Agency and things like that. This is what we're up against here. And then they try to intimidate and get people to fear standing up to them by calling them names, by accusing them of being awful people. And of course, it's also interesting how people like Kamala Harris are now starting to say, well, walls make sense along the border. Really? You can find easily her explanation of how those same walls that now she thinks might make sense are racist. That's what they did. They used to call people racist for saying that made sense. So we're in a truly Orwellian age right now, and we're going to have to fight our way through this election. And we also have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do personally? It's one thing if we're going to war politically, right? Then what are you doing to fight it? I mean, you can talk to people, but is that enough? Are you going to say years from now, or people who remember you years from now, going to say what you did? What did you do? You were alive. But this is the thing about politics is it's not a war that only certain people can or are allowed to fight. We all have a role, whether it's sending $10 to a candidate, or getting out and knocking some doors, or making some phone calls, or going on social media and promoting information so that others can find it, such as a Reagan movie that might actually cause people to remember what America is, what it's about, and why we should fight not only to preserve what's good about it, but defend it against an assault from Marxists. I mean, we're right back there. Kamala Harris's dad was a Marxist. Kamala, when she says what she really thinks, sounds like a Marxist. And that's what she is. She lusts for power, but she knows as the saying goes, she knows that you can vote your way into communism, but you usually have to shoot your way back out of it. It's very hard to vote your way back out of it because they find a way to use the power of the state. They weaponize it to destroy opponents, to charge political figures with crimes, and to threaten people who disagree with them with all sorts of intimidation and prosecution and sanctions and penalties. And that's the world we live in. So what are you going to do about it? Look at that list of what I just said and think, could I do one of those today? The answer I can tell you is absolutely a yes. Let me give you a few more examples of things we got to watch. So the state bar in Oregon has been found by a federal appeals court this past Wednesday that the state bar infringed on an Oregon attorney's First Amendment right after the State Bar magazine published a statement denouncing former President Donald Trump. The complaint was filed by an Oregon attorney, Daniel Crow, who's actually run for office as a Republican here in the state before, and the Oregon Civil Liberties attorneys against the state bar. He said that the Oregon State Bar violated his First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and freedom of association after publishing a statement in its bulletin publication denouncing white nationalism and then President Trump. The statement published by OSB similarly referenced a 2017 Portland MAX attack, MAX train attack that killed two people and the deaths of three people, killed two people and the deaths of three people when members of an alt-right rally clashed with counter-protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia. The statement was signed by the presidents of 7 Oregon Specialty Bar Associations, which are voluntary organizations separate from OSB. The joint statement read in part, well, I'll let you read it, but according to court documents, Crow objected to the statement and received a refund of his state bar dues after filing the complaint, alleging OSB violated his First Amendment rights. The complaint also alleged OSB violated the First Amendment because of the requirement for attorneys to join the OSB in order to practice law in Oregon. You know, it's a condition for being able to practice law in Oregon that you be a member of the bar. And this bar is actually decided that it is a political actor who can speak for people that are required to join it. So it's really compulsory speech on behalf of people required to join this organization. It was a 3-judge panel, and they reversed another judge's decision to get to this. And the court, on appeal on Wednesday, that's what it was, appeal of an earlier decision that said that it did not violate his freedom of speech because it refunded his dues. And dismiss the claims that the state's requirement to join OSB and practice law is a First Amendment violation. So we've got something that's making its way through the court system. It was the Ninth Circuit, a 3-judge panel at the Ninth Circuit, and attorneys should never be forced to associate with speech they don't support as a condition of practicing law. It was the reaction from the attorney for Daniel Crow. The state bar said, "We are pleased the Ninth Circuit recognized the mandatory membership licensing by the state bar is constitutional and that as an arm of the state bar is immune from liability in this case. In doing so, it dismissed numerous elements of the plaintiff's case. The court also provided helpful guidance about how the bar should operate in the future, including how to clarify when statements are not made on behalf of members of the bar. The court also suggested that any such remedies, such as those clarifying statements, need not be drastic in nature. We'll continue to review the decision and work with counsel on the next steps." So let's see if they appeal that decision or not. But as of now, they've gotten a smackdown for essentially violating First Amendment rights and freedom of association. This is something that I think is going to continue to work its way through the system. In Portland, a Portland city commission candidate by the name of Daniel DeMello who says he's a transit lover, a cyclist, and an organizer concerned about climate crisis, but he also supports healthy public safety and police community support, and he's been endorsed by the Portland Police Association. But that caused Antifa anarchists and elements to strike back at him in a petty criminal way through vandalism. Andy Ngo exposed this. The home of the moderate Portland City Council candidate was vandalized. And it was vandalized by people using Antifa slogans and graffiti. And so, you know, in some places, like in Portland, this is a battle of moderate people who don't necessarily have views consistent with conservatism at all, but they are competing with people who want to abolish the police and foment violence, political violence, in order to control others. This is why we have to fight. We have to stay in the battle here. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that that social media, in this case, Facebook, has been involved with some censorship and coercion from the government that they admitted not only happened, but they complied with it. The Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, explained, and GOP minority leader Daniel Bonham, who we've had on this program before, called this out and said, this is actually, it shows cracks in our democracy when this kind of situation occurs. And it was the Biden and Harris administration repeatedly pressured Facebook for months to censor certain content about COVID-19, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration when they didn't get compliance. Of course, there's a lot of different ways that the government can get you if you don't comply. And so a further investigation may reveal what some of those things actually were or were threatened to be. And the entire country, Senator Bonham says, was literally gaslighted. During a time of darkness and confusion and the need for connection, even humor, our current administration opted to censor information they didn't agree with in order to ensure they can control the country and everybody in it. It's not the job of the federal government to control the people. It's just not. It's against our Constitution and our civil liberties and rights. But they also, the letter also admits that Facebook was pressured to bury the Hunter Biden laptop story before the election, which is actually trying to influence a presidential election, and to do so through means that are sufficiently described as at best unethical and perhaps illegal. However, the influence of the Democrat Party through news departments, radio, newspapers, and more clearly was used to dupe voters into believing a falsehood about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and this laptop and the information it contained, just long enough to win an election. See, that's the thing about all of this stuff. When we go back and we look at the accusations that have been leveled against people like President Trump, the phony Russian collusion, there was only one presidential candidate colluding with Russia. And it was Hillary Clinton via Christopher Steele, who obtained information that was false from Russian agents and then put it into a report and sent it through and laundered it into the U.S. media in order to trigger, and successfully so, an investigation of President Trump for colluding with Russia. I know this is the stuff of Hollywood novels, but in this case, it really happened. And yet justice has not been done in that case. The truth has not been accurately. There's tons of people walking around who still think that President Trump colluded with Russia. Who also colluded with foreign actors in order and managed to secure a presidential victory, and that was Joe Biden, for the reasons I just described. They had all kinds of dealings with foreign nations. There were people overseas who were caught up in this maelstrom of distortion and lies. And they used it to dupe people in a materially demonstrable way. And now, where are we at? Well, we've had 3.5 years of a disastrous presidency, and yet we have media running around saying everything's fine. Yeah, I know. The way you know what they're doing is when they're accusing you of it. That's how you know. Um, and there's a lot to be said for the common sense of making sure that we let people know what's happening and then we encourage them to do the right thing. Now, here's some news, some national news that relates to Oregon specifically. President Trump won't appear in the voters pamphlet, but will still be on the ballot this fall. Like I said, it's unlikely that Oregon will tip the balance in the presidential election in any unpredictable way. But according to the Oregon Capitol Chronicle, the voters pamphlet will not contain a statement from President Trump, and it also will not contain a vice presidential statement. There is one from Kamala Harris, from the Libertarian candidate, the Green Party candidate, even Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's actually withdrawn from contention in swing states, but will still be on the Oregon ballot as the We the People Party's nominee. There's a progressive candidate, Cornel West, even a Constitution Party nominee. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who is Harris's running mate, has also submitted a voter pamphlet statement as a vice presidential candidate. So this is what you'll see. Just want you to be aware of this. And so some people are going to be confused. They're going to think that this was done to the president. I think it was his decision. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that people know that the most important thing you can do in this state in 2024 to influence the outcome of what happens with our country is to do everything we can to win the three up for grabs congressional races in districts 4, 5, and 6. District 5 is that is currently held by Lori Chavez Dreamer, Congresswoman, and she is facing State Representative Janelle Bynum. Janelle got in trouble here this week because she was using footage from foreign countries in order to give people the impression in some of her advertising that she had a strong affinity for in connection with police officers and wants to fight fentanyl, even though she was definitely one of the people cheering on the mostly peaceful protests of riots, looting, and arson that happened in Portland for 100 days in 2020. And so she's claiming that she'll work with local law enforcement to ensure our communities are safe and have the resources they need. But they used footage from the Ukraine, which is hilarious and sad. The National Republican Congressional Committee came out and called extreme Janelle Bynum's fake ad perfectly captures her fraudulent attempts to pull the wool over voters' eyes. Bynum has foreign actors posing as cops because real Oregon police officers say her radical agenda is too dangerous. And of course, the DCCC, the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, just called it a desperate attack, and said that, and then tried to switch the subject to abortion in a state where abortion is enshrined in law. So, again, we can see their game. We got it. District 5, as you know, is competitive, and you should take a look at that there. Now, the Oregon Coalition of Police and Sheriffs, which is one of the law enforcement organizations lobbying, made a statement about Bynum in her ad, saying that she proposed and passed bills that crippled the police's ability to keep communities safe, and echoed the message of Lori Chavez Dreamer and the NRCC. So I recommend everybody take a look at this, because if you're in District 5, you got to let people know that a giant phony baloney, Janelle Bynum, is trying to make the history disappear, just like they're trying to make the Borders Are title of Kamala Harris disappear. They're putting it down an Orwellian, what they call memory hole. And I think that another hole is at work here. And that is, well, I'll leave that to your imagination, what I'm referring to there. Now, more news. In the 6th district, Mike Erickson has been added to what they call the Young Guns list, which is after a poll showed that his race is very close, and that this is now considered a targeted district. The Young Guns designation was already given to the 4th district with Monique Despain a month earlier, because that has turned into not only a very competitive race, but Despain is a very strong candidate by description of the NRCC and has checked all the boxes of what you need to do to be successful and win. By the way, she has put out several press releases and gotten news coverage recently for speaking out on some of the issues that are very important that are facing the 4th district, and also making sure people have a clear idea of who her opponent, Val Hoyle, really is. Val Hoyle went on TV recently claiming that she's not under federal investigation, and that what she is doing with LaModa, which has been documented over the past 23 months, was just business as usual while she was the Bureau of Labor and Industry Commissioner, and that she did this with all kinds of other employers. And after that, and after calling her out for lies that she told during the interview, ones that are provably, demonstrably contradicted by the facts, which here is one of those press releases that I think is worth, and I'm very familiar with them because I'm her comms director, so I'm just relating some of the details to you for you to go read the rest. But she has put out a press release today that encourages the U.S. Department of Justice to go watch that video and maybe look into all the other businesses that she dealt with to see if she also, in fact, helped had cozy relationships with CEOs of companies that had employee complaints in front of Boley while she was the commissioner of Boley. Companies that owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in back taxes and faced dozens of lawsuits for debts owed to creditors, while making sizable donations to people, including Val Hoyle herself. If she had that relationship with others, then maybe it's time to dig deep and look into all of her communications. Right now, she's under federal investigation because her communications relating to an illegal grant that was given by the Bureau of Labor and Industry, which Val Hoyle was the ringleader pushing this through in order to make sure it happened. It's her communications that are being pursued and investigated. So she's under investigation. It's very easy to make that connection. And if she is not under investigation, I'm pretty sure she could go and get the Department of Justice and the FBI to clarify that. Monique Despain in January brought to the attention of authorities that there was this pattern of corrupt conduct. And 5 days after she did that, sent that to the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney of Oregon. 5 days later, that was when all the communications with between Val Hoyle and LaModa were subpoenaed while she was at the Bureau of Labor and Industry. Now, Monique Despain is doing the same thing, but with this video where Hoyle makes absurd claims that she had no idea that there was any wrongdoing or that there was anything nefarious about LaModa and its conduct, and that she had no idea that there was a connection between LaModa and the nonprofit that they formed in 2 weeks, and put put an executive director in charge of that was an employee of LaModa, and that the business registry actually said the name Rosa Cazares, the CEO of LaModa, as the controlling owner of the nonprofit that received the $550,000 grant. And of course, that grant was pulled back because it was illegal to take federal money and give it to a cannabis company. So anyway, I recommend you take a look at these, because if you know people in the 4th District and they don't know this, they need to know it. And they need to know it soon. There's other things that you can take a look at, but she's been very vocal lately. She's come out against Measure 118. And we have talked about Measure 118. We had Ed Deal on a few weeks ago, and it was a great show because we covered in detail how bad this is going to be for Oregon. It would be a 3% tax on the gross receipts of companies earning $25 million or more in revenue, which would put either out of business anybody earning less than 3% in profits, or would force them to pass on that cost of the tax to its customers, which is also known as inflation. So either way, it's economically destructive and inflationary. She takes an opposing position to it and explains why. There's a number of other topics that are worth looking into, but most of all, please spread the word and make sure that everyone knows about Monique Spain and knows about Val Hoyle in the 4th District. That is a very winnable district. If people are informed, then victory for Republicans is something that can be achieved there. So that kind of gives you a summary of the 3 races where Oregon can change the direction of the country. And we can do it by making sure that we prevail. And actually, that's great foreshadowing from what we might be able to accomplish in 2026, is to have more than half or more of our Oregon delegation to be Republican to the House of Representatives in DC. Last couple of items here as we wrap up for the hour. And this is actually something Monique Spain came out against, and Republicans in general have been opposing this, which is that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is going to auction 2 wind energy sites off the southern coast of Oregon in October. They're going to auction up to 195,000 acres. They decided to move ahead with this, even though the feedback sessions were easily 90% against it. There's going to be ballot questions on the ballot in Coos and Curry County here in November, where they're going to ask the citizens if the counties themselves should oppose officially and publicly these offshore windmill platforms, which are going to be in as much as 2,000 feet of water, tethered to the ocean floor, in prime fishing area, whale migration area, visible from the coast day and night. It will disrupt sport fishing, commercial fishing, and the seafood industry, and it'll frankly be a huge blow to the tourism industry, which is, between fishing and tourism, that's all they've got left down there, since timber was actually removed from something that they could count on as an industry. And but the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is moving ahead. And I think it's worth taking a look at this, because this is what rogue federal agencies do. They try to do whatever they can to get away with it. And it would be great if we had representatives, especially federal ones, that spoke boldly and unequivocally against this type of treatment. But we don't. We have people that say that they want a little bit more time for feedback which is being ignored anyway. And then when they don't get it, they just murmur and hum and don't really do anything about it. Virtue signaling doesn't cut it. It's necessary to go to the mat sometimes, and really, if you're a federal representative, then you hold everyone in the executive branch, including that federal agency, accountable, and you make sure that they understand that you're not going to tolerate it. It might mean that you have to work across party lines to accomplish something like that. But I just put in here a press release where you can read how Monique Despain is pointing out that Val Hoyle has failed to oppose these wind farms. She says that they're actually still pretty awesome. They're just not well liked. There you go. So, by the way, breaking news: 2 U.S. Marines were assaulted by a mob in Turkey, and they put a white hood over the head of one of the Marines. It was an local anti-American group, and I don't know. I don't know if Turkey's going to be such a safe place to be, but these were Marine service members who were embarked aboard the USS Wasp, and they were victims of an assault in a town called Izmir today. Let's see what is done about this, because obviously Turkey is a different country than it was 10, 20 years ago. And the leader of the country, who's managed to hold on to power and even change the constitution to keep power, is determined to whoop up sentiment against Israel and against the United States, which, of course, as we know, is very important, significant, and of course dangerous, even here on the domestic home front. So please take a look at that. I've posted that article. Let's look out for and pray for our service members serving us around the world. Last story: 16 county clerks in Oregon have raised concerns around the ranked choice voting ballot measure that's going to be on the ballot this fall. It's Measure 117. Ed Deal has talked about it several times, and we continue to keep people informed about this. But now we're finding that county clerks are concerned about it. County clerks that are elected to represent their counties and to ensure the viability of our election system cannot do so. And if this passes, they will be disempowered from doing so. They'll be reliant on machines, and they will not actually be able to conduct recounts at the county level that can verify the accuracy of any of the voting results for that county, because it'll only be possible to determine the voting results by rolling up all the results statewide. So I would ask that you take the time to have a look at that and think about that issue as you inform people you know what they need to know this fall. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching. And yes, that's correct, Lori. The time to respond to BOEM has ended, but the time to do something about BOEM has not. In the 4th District, if you get a proper elected member of Congress, in this case Monique Despain, then we can take the fight to BOEM, and we can put a stop to it and reverse all that garbage and get the wishes of the people of Curry and Coos counties respected going forward. You know, like a representative form of government should. Anyway, thanks again, Lori, Bobby, and everybody who's watching, and share the show with everyone you can. Thanks for being loyal listeners and viewers of the Captive Audience, and we'll be back tomorrow night with the next episode of the Captive Audience. It should be Dawn, and I think maybe Sunny. And so I hope you enjoy that one. Stay strong. Look for what you can do, and